Hello and welcome back everyone to another project in the Helix software engineering program. In this video we'll talk about functions and nested loops project. So first we will talk about some concepts like what are functions, what are nested loops, and what are header files. And next we'll go to each task and explain it. Okay, so first let's see what are functions in C and what are header files and what are nested loops. A function in C is a group of statements that together perform a task. A function takes input and performs some computation, then produces some output. This output can be a number or can be a display to the user, or it can be anything. Okay, and functions also are usable block of code, so we can call it or we can use it as many times as we want. So it is a code that we create once and we use anytime we want it. For functions we have two types of functions. We have library function. Those are functions that come in the box with the C compiler, like printf and square root and scanf and so on. And we have the user-defined function. Those are functions that the user creates to use in the program. So let's see how to create a function. First of all, we have to declare a function. So to declare a function, we have to specify the return type. It can be character, it can be integer, it can be void. Void means it doesn't return anything. Then the name of the function, then arguments. Those arguments, if the function accepts arguments, we have to specify them. If it doesn't accept any argument, we just use the parentheses. Okay, for example, to declare a function that calculates the sum of two numbers, we have to define the return type, which is integer, then the name of the function, then the arguments. So to calculate the sum of two numbers, we need those two numbers. So we pass them as arguments to the function. The first argument is integer and the second is integer also. So here we have the type of this argument, then the name. The name is not mandatory. We can just specify integer. So this is how we declare a function. Okay, next we have to define a function. Defining a function means expressing what this function do or creating all the statements. So it is the same as declaration. So we specify the return type, then the name of the function, then the arguments in the header of the function. Then we open these curly braces, and inside of them we define the body of the function and the statements of this function. For example, for our sum function, we define the return type, which is integer, then the name of our function, then the arguments here, then we open these curly braces, and inside the body we define our statements. For example, we initialize or we create a variable named sum, then inside this variable we'll assign the value a plus b, then we will return the sum variable. So this is the body of the function. Now to call a function or to use a function, we just specify the name of the function, then the arguments. For example, for our sum function, we'll create a variable named result that will hold the return value of sum function. So sum function will calculate the sum of 5 and 6, then it will return the sum. This result value will hold the return of the sum function. So the result will be 11. Now let's talk about header files. So header files are just files with the extension .h. So those files are created to organize our code. So they contain C functions declaration and macro definitions. For header files, we have two types. We have the standard header files. Those are defined in the C compiler, like for example, the standard input-output header. We have used it so many times to manipulate the input and the output. And we have the user-defined headers. Those are headers created by the user. And to include those headers in our program, we use hash include. For standard headers, we use hash include. Then we open these arrows here and then the name of our header file. For user-defined headers, we don't use the arrows. We use the double quote, then the name of our header file. Okay. Now let's see nested loops in C. Nested loops are just a loop statement inside another loop statement. So it is loop inside another loop. We can define any number of loops inside another loop. So we can have as many loops inside each other. Okay. For example, we have a while loop, And inside this while loop here, we have another while loop. And we can have as many while loops or for loops inside of each other. For example, here we have a while loop, and inside this while loop, we have a for loop. So nested loops means a loop inside another loop, inside another loop, and so on. Now let's move on to our project. First, let's see the requirements. Here, there are so many requirements. For example, the code should follow the bit style, and we are not allowed to use global variable, and we can't have more than 5 functions in a file, and we are not allowed to use the standard library, for example, printf and puts and so on. And we are allowed to use this putchar function. Okay, and here we have the prototypes of all our functions, including the putchar function should be included in a header file named main.h. And we have to push our header file also to GitHub. So while pushing to GitHub, we should also push the main.h file. So now with the first task, in this task, we have to create a program that prints this sentence here, putchar, followed by a new line, and the program should return 0. For this project, we have to be inside the Elix low-level programming Git repository. Then inside of it, we'll create a new directory for this project, which is functions nested loop. So let's create it. We'll change directory to this created one. Next, we have to create a readme file inside this directory. Then we have to create our main.h file. This will hold all the declaration of our functions, including the putchar function. So inside of this main.h, we will add the declaration of putchar function. The putchar function is given in the project. This is the source code for this putchar function. We will include the declaration, which is integer putchar, and it accepts a character as an argument. So we will copy it and we'll add a semicolon at the end. Okay, we will save this file. So now we have created our header file. Let's start with the first task. So we'll create this C file here. Inside of this file, we'll create our program. First, we have to include our header file that contains the declaration of the putchar function. Next, we will create the description for our program. Then we will create our main function. Inside of the main function, we will use the putchar function to print putchar. So we will call the putchar function. Then we will give it as argument the letters of our sentence. So we will give the putchar these letters here. Then we will add a new line. Then we will return 0. Now we will save this file. For the second one, we have to write a function that prints the alphabets in lowercase followed by a new line. The prototype for this function is void, so it doesn't return anything, and the name of the function, which is print alphabet, then argument void. That means it doesn't accept any arguments, and we can only use the putchar twice in our code. So first, we have to add this prototype to our header file. So we'll copy this and go to our main.h file. Then we will insert the prototype for this function. Then we will save the file. Okay, now we will create our C file, which will contain our function. Inside of this file, we'll create the function. The first thing we have to do is to include our main.h file that contains the declaration of all the functions, including the putchar function. Then we will add a description for our function. Then we will define our function. So we will start by the return type, which is void, then the name of our function, then arguments, which are void. Okay, so this function will print the alphabets in lowercase. In the previous project, we also printed the alphabets in lowercase in the main function. So what we did, we initialized an integer I, then we used a for loop that will go through all the alphabets in the ASCII code from the letter A to Z. Inside this loop, we will use the putchar function given in the project. Then we will print a new line. So this is the definition of the function. We have declared the function in the main.h, and this is the definition of the function. Now we'll save this file. Okay. For the next task, we have to create a function that prints 10 times the alphabet in lowercase followed by a new line. The prototype for this function is this one here. It doesn't return anything, it doesn't accept any arguments. Okay, and we can use the putchar function. The name of this C file is to print alphabet x10. So we'll create this file. And before creating our function, we should add the prototype of the function to the main.h file. So this is the prototype for our function. We will add it to the main.h file. We will save, and then we will define our function. First thing is to include the main.h file. Then we will add a description for our function here, and then we will start defining the function, starting with the return type, then the name of the function, then the arguments. In the previous task, we used a for loop to print all alphabets. Now we have to print all alphabets 10 times, so we'll use two loops. The first loop will go from 1 to 10 to print 10 times, then the second one to print the alphabets. Okay, so we will have two nested loops. So we will define a variable for the first loop and the second variable for the second loop. Then we will define the first loop that will go from 1 to 10. Inside this loop, we'll define the second loop that will print the characters. Then we will add a new line. Okay, then we will close our function. So now we have the first loop here that will go from 1 to 10, and in each iteration of this loop will run. It will print all characters, then it will go to the second iteration, then it will print all the characters, then a new line, then it will go to the next iteration till it reaches 10. Okay, so we'll save this file and we'll go to the next task. In this task, we have to write a function that checks for lowercase characters. So the prototype for this function is this one, and this function should return 1 if the letter C is lowercase, and it will return 0. Otherwise, if it is not lowercase, it will return 0. We'll add the prototype to the main.h file. Then we will save it. Then we'll create our C file for the function. Inside of the C file, we will include the main header. Then we will add a description for our function. Then we will define the function. So this function have a return value of integer, either 0 or 1, and it does accept an argument which is an integer also. So we'll define the function. Inside of this function, we have to check for these arguments here, which is a number that represents a character in the ASCII table if it is lowercase. So in the ASCII table, lowercase characters starts from 97 to 122. So we will check if the argument is inside this range from 97 to 122. So here we will use an if statement. So if this argument is greater than or equal to 97 and it is less or equal than 122, that means it is lowercase. So we should return 1. And else, if it doesn't exist in this range, then we should return 0. Then we will print a new line. Then we will close our function here. So this is the definition of this function. So it will check if this integer here that represents a character, if it is lowercase, it will return 1. If it is not, it will return 0. We will save this file. Let's move to the next task. In this task, we have to write a function that checks for alphabetic character. So it will return 1 if the argument is a letter, lowercase or uppercase, and it will return 0 otherwise. So this function will accept an argument. If that argument is a letter, either uppercase or lowercase, it will return 1, otherwise it will return 0. So we'll add this prototype to the main.h file. Then we will save it and create the C file that will contain the function. Inside of it, we'll first include the main.h, then add a description for our function that will return 1 if the argument is a character and 0 otherwise. Now we will define the function that will return an integer and accept an integer as an argument. For this function, we have to check if this argument C is either in this range, so for uppercase, or it is lowercase, so either it is from 65 to 90 or from 97 to 122. So we will have an if statement that will check the first condition or the second condition. So either if it is from 97 to 122, or this is the or symbol, or if the C is from 65 to 90. So if it is lowercase or uppercase, it will return 1, else it will return 0. That means it is not a letter. Then we will print a new line. Okay, so that's it for this function. We will save this file and we'll move to the next one. In this task, we have to write a function that prints the sign of a number. So it will return 1 and print plus if a number is greater than 0, and it will return 0 and print 0 if the number n is 0, and it will return -1 and print minus if the number n is less than 0. So this function will return an integer and it will accept as argument an integer. Okay, we will add this prototype to the main.h file. Then we will save it. Now we will create the file for our function. And inside of the file, we will define this function. First, we have to include the main.h file and add a description for our function. Then the definition of our function will look something like this. We have the return type, the name of the function, then the argument. Inside this function, we will check if the number is greater than 0, we will print 43, which is the sign of plus. Then we'll return 1. If it is less than 0, we'll print 45, which is the symbol for minus, and we will return -1. Else, we'll print 0. And we will return also 0. Then we will add a new line at the end. Okay, we will save this file. In the task number 6, we have to write a function that computes the absolute value of an integer. So this function will calculate the absolute value. So either if it is positive or negative, it will return a positive value. So let's add the prototype of this function to the main.h file. Then create the C file for our function. In the inside of it, we will include the main.h file, then add a description of our function, then the definition of our function. So it will check if the argument is positive, then it will return it. If it is not positive, it will multiply it by -1 and return the value. So it will return the positive value. Okay. So we will save this file. For the task number 7, we have to write a function that prints the last digit of a number. We will add the prototype to the main.h file. Then we will save. Then we will create the file for our function. Inside of it, we'll include the main.h and then add the description of our function, then the definition of our function. So our function, first we'll create a variable L for the last digit, and the last digit is the rest of the division, the number n by 10. Then if that last digit is less than 0, it will pass as argument to putchar minus L plus 48. 48 is 0. Then it will return minus L. Else, that means if it is positive, then it will as argument to putchar that number L plus 48. then it will return that number. Okay. In task number 8, we have to write a function that prints every minute of the day starting from 00 to 23:59. First, we will add the prototype to the main.h file, then save it. Then we'll create a file for our function. Inside the file, we will add the main.h file and the description of our function. Then we will define our function. So here we have to print all the minutes. So if we see in the example, it should print from 0000 to 23:59. So the hours go from 00 to 23 and the minutes from 00 to 59. So we'll have to make 4 loops. 2 loops for the hour and 2 loops for the minute. So each digit have its own loop. So the code will look something like this. So we have first loop that will go from 0 to 2, and the second one from 0 to 9, and the third one from 0 to 5, and the fourth one from 0 to 9. And then if we reach 24, we should break. Then we will print all the digits with the colon here, and then a new line. Okay? I will stop this video here, and I will make a second part of this video where I will explain carefully and in details these nested loops and the tables concept. So stay tuned and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already.